Right, hi everybody, and welcome to Cloud Computing's third lecture. So today I'm gonna go through a couple of things. First, I will explain the third lab set, which is Sunstone. So by this point, you should really have your cloud software installed, OpenNebula installed and running on your systems. And most of you hopefully will also have a virtual machine built as well that's running in there. Now, it's a good opportunity for me to talk about progress. There are far less lab seats than there are lab sessions in the module. Okay, so if you do find yourselves that you are not actually keeping up with the speed that I deliver the lecture slides and I explain the lab seats, don't worry about it. The reason why I'm delivering one lab seat per week is because I want you all to have all of the information that you need to have in your hands, so that then once I'm finished explaining all the lab seats, we can turn these lectures into sort of tutorial sessions, and I can answer questions that you might have and so on, and then you can all progress in your own pace. So you can all go through all of the material, all of the lab seats, whether as fast or as slow as you like. Okay. Generally, it's not a very good idea to move very fast. Remember, everything that you do in the lab, you need to take screenshots and document properly in your logbooks. All right. So it's better to move slowly, understand everything that's happening, and make sure you get all of the documentation, and make sure that you explain all of your screenshots in the logbook while you're there, while you're doing it. Okay. We have 10 or 11 lab sessions, and there's only 5 or 6 lab sets. Okay, so there's plenty of time, don't worry about it. So, if you haven't finished building the virtual machine, then it doesn't really matter, don't panic about it, don't stress about it. Okay, these lectures will be recorded anyway, even if you are being so slow in progress that you get to a lab set 2 or 3 weeks late. You can also, before you come into the lab, go on Moodle and watch the video of the lecture where I explain what's happening, so that you have a refresher on what you should be doing in the lab for that lab. All right, so if you haven't finished building the virtual machine, don't worry about it. Just make sure that it's done correctly, you have all the screenshots that you need for it and everything else, and then move on when you're confident that you know everything that you need to know about the labs. So the third lab set that we have is called Sunstone Familiarization. So essentially what we will do is we'll go through the web interface, and now that we have a virtual machine to play around with, then we can try and figure out what all the buttons basically do in there. I could have done this before building the virtual machine, but having a virtual machine gives you the opportunity to play around with it and try and see much more of the features that are provided in the cloud itself. And plus a cloud without any virtual machines inside it, it's pretty pointless. All right, so that's why I'm doing it in this order. So, can I full screen this? Let's see. Yeah, I can. In OpenNebula, we have 3 different types of views. The first view is the admin view. It's what you have been seeing so far because you are logged in as one admin. One admin is the global highest level system administrator of your cloud. It has absolute power to do anything in the cloud itself. Okay, any changes to the settings in OpenNebula, any changes to the virtual machines inside there, to the hosts and anything else. You need this account in order to set up the cloud properly, so that you can basically set up all of the initial details about it and use it and eventually offer it to your users. Yes? Remember, a cloud is not supposed to be something that one person uses. A cloud is something that you build for your customers or your users in an organization and so on. So the one admin account is the absolute administrator of the account, and once the system is built, it's going to be the most infrequently used account. You shouldn't really need to go in as one admin and do stuff to it. The reason for this is because you can have virtual data centers in the cloud itself. So you can have smaller virtual clouds inside the cloud, and they all have their own VDC admins. So you can have a cloud system that has lots of resources, lots of CPUs, memory, hard drive space, and so on, a bunch of virtual machines that exist in it and can run in it, but But eventually you will end up with lots of multiple users in possibly different usage scenarios in there. So you can have different virtual data centers. So you can have different mini clouds inside that. So you will have administrator users for that, for those different groups as well. They will have VDC admins. So let's say, for example, if we use the university as an example, if we have a cloud built in OpenNebula, which actually we have, and it's in the back of a2.net behind the glass doors. Okay, Cedric and Alex have the one admin account. Actually, I have it as well. And in there, we have different virtual data centers. So we have a virtual data center for students, we have a virtual data center for researchers, and we have a virtual data center for staff as well. Okay, they all have different administrator accounts as well. All right, so there's 3 VDC admin accounts that have the capability to do whatever one admin has allowed them to. Okay, so the research group, for example, is allowed to play around completely with all of the resources and create virtual machines that have as many CPU cores and as much RAM and as much hard drive space as they can afford to, as we have in the cloud. All right, so those sub-level users, the VDC admin users, are essentially the ones that will mostly manage the day-to-day processes of how the cloud is actually being used. And then in the end, you will have your cloud user. You will have the people that you built the cloud for, whether they're your customers or whether they're users in a company network and so on. And they are the ones with the fewest privileges in the cloud. They're basically able to start up virtual machines and use them, run programs in there, run some software, and basically go about their daily, day-to-day business. All right. So these end users, again, can only do what the VDC admins allow them to do on those computers. So if the one admin account has the cloud and has all the resources and has created different templates of virtual machines that can be used, CentOS VM, Windows 11 VM, and so on, then those VDC admin users will create all of the permissions on the account, user accounts, and everything else for all of the users inside their virtual data center, and they will be able to use them as they should. The users themselves should only theoretically, depends on the usage scenario, be able to start up, instantiate a virtual machine, use it what they need to use it for, and then shut it down, and that's it. All right, so we'll see those 3 different views when we work on this lab sheet. The first and most important thing that I want you to play around with, logged in as one admin, is to play around with the different states of the virtual machines. So virtual machines in the cloud exist in various different stages. So you can have a virtual machine that exists as a template. So it's defined as a virtual machine that has 2 CPU cores, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 10 gigabytes of hard drive space, and that's it. This virtual machine is not running. It exists as a template for you ready to choose it and instantiate it, create an instance of this virtual machine, and run it so you can actually log in, work on it, and use it. Now, once you instantiate the virtual machine, depending on what sort of virtual machine it is, you will be able to either shut it down or not. You will be able to suspend it, and you'll be able to keep it running in the cloud or not. Depending on whether the hard drive is persistent, and a persistent hard drive is a hard drive that keeps all of the data that you write into it, you will be able to start up a virtual machine, you'll be able to shut it down and power it up back up again so that you can actually use it. Now, virtual machines, when they run, templates when they get instantiated really, their images get copied from the image to the system data store. Remember, during the installation, you can get 3 data stores, file system and image. All right. The image data store is where they just kept to be ready to be used, essentially. So once you instantiate a template, it will copy the images that are related to that template into the system data store, and it will run from there. This means that anything that you do in the virtual machine while it's running will change the image itself in the system data store. Okay, it will not make changes to the image data store itself. So because of this complexity of this, you can have various different states that the virtual machine can go in. So you can have, for example, suspend. So the virtual machine is suspended, so it's not running as an operating system, it's not taking up IP addresses anymore, and so on. So you can basically use it or suspend it, and it will stay on the system as running. It will keep taking up the resources. So it will keep taking up the memory and the CPU and the hardware that you allocated to it. You can power it off completely. So you can power off a VM. So it's shut down as far as the operating system is concerned, but it's still kept on the host. So it's still, the copy of the image is still kept onto the system data store. You can stop it, so that stop will save the VM state and it will move it back to the system data store. So it will keep any changes in the virtual machine and then move it back to where it's supposed to live, ready to run. So shutdown is different to stop. Yeah. You can undeploy it completely, so that will power off the virtual machine and then take it to the system data store. So if you had any work in there, unless your hardware is persistent, it will disappear. You will lose it, because you've moved the virtual machine out of the cloud. You can reboot a VM, which basically reboots the VM. You can delete and recreate, which cleans the virtual machine and moves it to pending and restarts it. And any information or anything that had gone wrong inside the virtual machine will be undone. So that means that, for example, if you're installing some software and it crashes your virtual machine, then if you do this, then it will read the initial image back from the data store, create the virtual machine again as it was in a sort of restored state. You can shut down, which powers off the VM, cleans the host, and the VM is removed from OpenNebula. So this is essentially the red button at the very end, the one you will use most while you're playing around with it. And you can delete, which is VM is immediately destroyed regardless of state, and it's not recommended for normal users to basically do, because that causes other problems. So for example, it causes the images to go into an error state, and then you cannot actually start other virtual machines while the images are in error state. Which is useful to you, because if you're trying to start up a virtual machine and it freezes for some reason, some setting is wrong, it doesn't read something correctly, and you just want the instance to disappear so you can start all over again, maybe you've used the wrong network card or something like that. If you do delete it, the button for this is the button in the middle of the page that has the 3 vertical dots on it. If you do delete the virtual machine, then in order to start the virtual machine again using the images, you will need to go back to storage, images, and enable the image that is in error state. Okay, so you will need to do that, otherwise it will not actually be able to run. So other than the states, you can see the virtual machine's different components. So, and you can play around with the resources of the virtual machine. This is basically called dimensioning the virtual machine, because you can change important aspects of it in the cloud. So you can, for example, change the storage. The virtual machine can be running completely, and you can add or remove a hard drive if you want to. So you can attach or detach a hard drive, and that will basically mean that the virtual machine will see as if you're, adding a new USB stick or something like that. All right. So you can play around with the storage. In the lab sheet itself, I ask you to create a new image. Give it a small size of 100 megabytes, so really small. Give it a format QCOW2, and then attach it to your virtual machine live while the virtual machine is running. So you can do that and see what actually happens. And then in fact, you can also go and detach it later on as well if you want to. Network, you can attach and detach network cards while the virtual machine is running. And you can take snapshot of the system. So you can take system snapshot and revert them back into their current running state. And then capacity, you can resize the VM capacity. So if you remember when we were creating the virtual machine, next to the CPU and memory sizes, it had the little box that says resize, and we checked yes on that one. Okay, this means that we can resize the amount of CPU cores, the amount of memory on the virtual machine that we're running, and so on. And you can do that live while the virtual machine is running. So you can play around with this while your VM is running and see what happens. Don't be afraid to play around with all of those options. If you break it, nothing serious happens. Worst case scenario, you might have to rebuild the virtual machine completely, but that would only happen if you did something like deleting the original image of it. Yes, if a virtual machine is running, then remember it's a copy of the original image, so whatever you do to it doesn't really matter with regards to the original image that you built. Okay, so don't be afraid to play around, delete stuff, do whatever you like, as long as you don't delete the original image of the operating system that's installed. Then we have permissions. So there is something that you will definitely all need to do, okay? Because we will create groups of users and different sub administrator accounts and so on, you will need to have the correct permissions for everything in your system to run, okay? So you need to go onto your images and onto your templates and make sure that you give the correct owner, group, and other permissions in order to use, manage, or administer the virtual machines that you're building. And because the first virtual machine that you build as one admin, you built it as one admin, you need to be able to let your other users actually create and use those virtual machines in there. All right. So you need to apply this to the images, templates, and virtual networks of your cloud. So you need to basically make them all look like they do here. You then need to create a group. The group that you will create will be called students, and the username will be student admin. Okay. Always use localhost 1 as the password everywhere so that we know what the password is for everything. And if I need to come and sit on your computer and fix something, I can basically know the password straight away in order to log in, because eventually we will have to move between one admin and the student accounts lots of times during a lab session in order to manage everything. Okay, so you need to create a user and you need to make sure that you create an administrator account. It's on the next tab. When you do that, you just need to enable the option and it will do that automatically, to automatically create a student's admin account. There are access lists as well associated with all of the users and everything that you do. This slide is here just for information, just so that you can see, as an example of sort of permissions that you can have per users and groups and everything else. So there's nothing much to actually do in this one. And then we have virtual data centers in our cloud. So we can use these in order to make smaller clouds inside our cloud and manage our system according to the users, according to the groups that we have created in our cloud. You will then need to eventually log in as VDC admin, so that will be the student admin account that you have created. And once you do that, you can log in, you can go to users, you can create an example student user, and you can assign quotas. So a student can use only 2 CPUs out of the 16 CPUs available in the system, and so on and so forth. So log in as student admin, play around the system a little bit and see exactly what sort of information is available for you there, so that you can see exactly what you can actually change and what you cannot change as well. If you do find something that you would like to be able to change, for example, hot swap network cards that maybe you cannot, you can log in back as one admin and go to the preferences and go to the permissions for the student admin group, and assign the correct permissions to the student admin user in there. Okay, so you will need to go back and forth between one admin and student admin, and then eventually the student account as well. And finally, you will need to log in as a normal cloud user. You log in as student. You should, if you have all of your permissions set up correctly, be able to see a CentOS virtual machine that will show up as an icon. It might not have this lovely icon, it might have something else, or it might not have an icon at all. Okay, you should be able as a student to basically start this virtual machine. So you should be able to instantiate it, run it, log in there, and use it. All right, once you do that, again, I want you to play around, see what you can do. Play around with the power options, so try to power it off, try to suspend it, see exactly what is available to you. And if you really want to get into it, you can go back to student admin account and play around with the permissions of the user that you just created and see if you can allow or disallow the student to actually suspend a virtual machine or send it back to the data store and so on. All right, see if you can limit the actions that the end user can actually take on the virtual machine that you've let them use. Once it's running, it doesn't look exactly like that in this revision of OpenAble that we're using, but you should be able to see the stats of the virtual machines that are running in your system. So how many VMs are running, how many CPU cores are being used, how much memory is being used in the system, and so on. I'm not going to go into this. These are just additional features that we have in OpenAble, so you don't need to worry about it. Have a look if you like, have a look in your free time, see what they are and what they do. But there's nothing to do with regards to the LabSit itself on this. Any questions about all this? You will have when you get to the lab, don't worry. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here.